real familiar with this story here. Now, I thought about what caused this jealousy, and we're going to get into the lesson, but this is just a little bit about why we have this example to show us what jealousy is capable of doing in our lives if left to go. Talking a little bit about this jealousy, I think it kind of progressed from the very beginning of time. If you go back and you find out that Leah became Jacob's first wife and also had the children, 10 sons actually, before Joseph was born. Many years that Rachel was barren, and then finally had a son, Joseph. Well, obviously, I believe, if you can read between the lines, that there was a lot of joy in that house when Joseph was born. There was a lot of festivities. There was a lot of partying to think that Rachel now had a son, Joseph. And so immediately, that rivalry that had already been in the family exploded at this point, where it says that Jacob loved Joseph. He loved him because he was a child of his older age, and he was the child of his beloved wife Rachel, who was never able to conceive and bear a child. So we've got a picture here that we can kind of look played out in a family form, that this rivalry is something that just didn't appear overnight, but it has long, slowly festered. Now we're going to find out that not only that, it says that Jacob actually loved Joseph more than the others. That's written in the scriptures. It was pretty obvious to everyone that there was partiality shown here, and that Joseph was the beloved of him. Then also we're going to find out that this love gave him this coat of many colors, which was sort of saying that you're preferred, and along with this preferring you above others, it also has a connotation of you are going to now receive the birthright. Even though you're one of the youngest, you will receive it. And there's an actual reference a little bit to this in 1 Chronicles chapter 37, verse 1, where it talks about, or 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 1, where it talks about it being presented as wealth and the birthright blessings with this coat. So I think that the brothers certainly interpreted it that way, and they were looking out for their best interest as well as this hatred that had grown. Okay, the story's going to start to unfold in chapter 1, although our lesson text isn't going to start for a while, your written lesson text, but it's going to unfold in verse 1. Going back, though, let me go back for a second to page 82 to some of this information as an introductory to your lesson. You have read it, but it says down towards the bottom, jealousy is dangerous because it corrupts one's heart and usually leads to more tragic sin. And the story of Joseph and his brothers attests to this truth. Now, it asks the question, and you might want to add some more to this, why is jealousy so dangerous and corrupting? Anybody have anything that they want to say about that, either out of your experience or out of biblical truths or verses? Why is jealousy so dangerous and in corrupting?
Because once people's jealous, they can't get it off their mind. So they're thinking about it all the time, which makes it worse and worse. And it's like revenge. A lot of people have revenge. I don't understand how anybody can have revenge, because it's only hurting the person with revenge more than the person that they have revenge against.
Yeah, that person apparently doesn't realize that, and I think it's wise to keep publicing that fact that it's hurting you worse than it's hurting them. And same with jealousy. I mean, nobody cares except you. So yeah, there's all these. Anybody else have anything to add?
Right here. I agree with the jealousy thing. It can cause a lot of problems in churches. I've seen it a lot. But another thing that just crossed my mind is, they always blame the brothers for their jealousy, but I get to think, had all these problems.
Yeah, it started out, and the whole family was really dysfunctional. But it started out, and that's what I said. It slowly grew through all of these events, and I kind of have to, when I read it, say poor Joseph. He's a lad of 17. Evidently, he isn't mature enough emotionally. He hasn't gone through experiences really to know how to act and to respond. And then, too, we don't really know what kind of character that Joseph had at that time. So, jealousy is very injurious, and it can rapidly turn into strife, contempt, hatred, revenge, envy, all of these that you said, when left to grow. And in most people's lives, they let it grow. They don't know how to really stop that. And I think one of the things as believers that's outstanding to me that showed me or reminded me of what a gross sin it is to God when it's listed with all those others, sins and jealousy. So it's not a little sin. And I think that in my life, I am going to be more observant of what thought goes through my mind and identify it with jealousy, or that it could become jealousy. I said I wasn't going to name it, but I will. Just because it's just like looking out the window. If I'd look out the window at my sister and brother-in-law, I would see their kids coming down and helping them do all this yard work, and mine are nowhere to be found. But that's just.
I think everybody has a little bit.
That's right. We're just fine-tuning that a little bit, and that could easily turn into jealousy. Well, I deserve that. Why, and that's what it is. We need to fine-tune this so that we can stop it in the bud, or otherwise it will grow. Go ahead, Terry. I cut you off.
That's all right. When I was dating Mary back in high school, he ended up being my best friend, but I hated his guts. Jerry Eisen's brother. Honest to John, I loved him after that, but I was jealous anytime Mary dated somebody. I was never jealous of somebody else having something better than me.
Right.
That never did bother me.
That's right.
Something like that there, I don't know.
Yeah.
I was young and dumb then.
Absolutely. And it can just show up in so many places. I mean, just somebody gets a little bit of recognition and you think, well, I deserve that more than they deserve that. And then if it's allowed to fester, all of a sudden you don't like that person, at least not as well as you think you did. And then it can fester some more. Well, let's do something to put them down so that other people don't. It's just a terrible thing. And I think today's lesson, I want to make us all, myself included, make us aware to be able to examine motives, examine thoughts, because everything starts out with a thought. And then what are you going to do with that thought? Are you going to allow it to grow, or are you going to stop it immediately? And this is really the conclusion, but here we are. One way to stop that is to pray for that person, or find something good about that situation. Wow, I really thank you, God, that my sister and brother-in-law, I hope they're not going to watch this on the internet, that they have somebody to come help. Now that would be reversing that situation, right? And I just use that to show you how little a thing of jealousy could just creep up, and how it could change you, and how we have the ability with God's help to actually change that situation. Well, wow, I went through things that I wasn't even planning on to do here, but I think we're going to be aware of that, and we need to, because if God places that as the sin like he did amongst all those other sins that were listed, immorality, drunkenness, carousing, debauchery, on, and jealousy, it says, wow, that is something that God takes very seriously. So it should be something that we should too. Well, real quickly now, the story's going to start to unfold in Genesis chapter 37, verse 1. And it says, Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed the land of Canaan. If you remember last week, if you looked at your map, Jacob was up at Shechem. Remember the terrible thing that happened, chased him out, and he came down. He stopped a little bit at Bethel, but then his intentions was to keep on going south even of Bethlehem into the Hebron area where where his father Isaac had lived and Abraham previous to him. So he goes down there, and that's a scenario of where that is. And so it starts out right away now about the sons and about Joseph. And if you look at verse 3, in verse chapter 2, here's something that is also something that adds to this ultimate act of jealousy. In verse 2, it says that Joseph, and it says he was 17 years old. You get that in verse 2. And that he was actually out on a hillside with his brothers, 4 of them. Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And he was watching sheep with those 4, only 4, not all 10 brothers, but 4 of the brothers. And when he came back to Jacob, he brought, it says, a bad report to Jacob about them. Now, we have no idea what the report is. No idea at all. But just as he came back, it was like 17-year-old boy telling on his older brothers to his father Jacob. And when they found that out, that he had brought that report, it said they hated him even more. Well, in verses 3 and 4 of Genesis, it says Jacob loved Joseph more, and because of this, he made a richly ornamented coat for him, and which the brothers, when they saw it, they hated him. And it says none of them could say anything good to Joseph or about Joseph. So hatred started, and a lot of it might have not been no fault of Joseph himself, but it started and he hated. Well, in verse 5, we're going to find out Joseph has dreams, and one of the 2 dreams that he has is in verses 5 through 8 of our book. And it'll talk about these dreams that he had. So let's go to that, and since I am not seeing real well, Scott, read those verses 5 through 8 if you can for us. And it's called, your lesson title is just called A Dream. And this is going to tell about the dream that kind of really set the ball to rolling with these brothers as Joseph dreamed his dream, then told his brothers about the dream, and it's going to tell us their reaction to it. So listen as Scott reads this to us.
Then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. There we were, binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly my sheep stood up, and your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheep. Are you really going to reign over us?" His brothers asked him. "Are you really going to rule us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and what he had said.
Okay, we've got this, and you're all familiar with this. The dream was the sheaf of wheat stood up, and all other 11 of them bowed down to this, and only Joseph. He didn't say, "I am it," but they knew exactly what he was meaning by this and what the dream meant. Joseph didn't know at this point. He was probably in a point of perplexity, and I don't think that this dream was just like a dream that he had every night. This was something that really stood out to him, and it was so real, so vivid, that he had to report to his brothers and tell his brothers exactly what happened. I mean, it just must have been something that changed his life and his whole disposition, and he told his brothers this dream. Then your scripture is going to leave out the next dream. It's in the verses that are following. I believe it's verses 12. No, verses 8 and 9. That's not right either. Where is it? 9. The second dream? Yeah. Okay, I can't see. Oh.
read it?
Yes, please. Oh, there, verse 9. Then he had another dream. I see it, yes.
Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me.
Keep on going.
When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind.
Okay, he has two dreams, and I don't think they were the same night. I don't have any reason to believe that or not to believe it. It's just sort of, I think this was over some sort of a period of extension. It might have been the very next night, which made it very forceful. But he comes and he tells them this dream, and this time this even includes the sun and the star, moon and stars, which would mean his brothers, his mothers, and the sons, his brothers. So they were all going to bow down. Well, then your book is going to start up with, in verse 12, what had happened, or verse 12? Well, I know, but verse 12, let's look at that in between time. Because his brothers were sent away with all the herds of sheep, and they were trying now to find some good pasture. Lo and behold, they go back to Shechem area. Now, we talked about Shechem area, why that we thought Isaac probably had settled down there. It's a more lush pasture. It's fed by mountain streams from the mountain ridge that kind of runs up along Shechem. And it was just good pasture. It was a good place. So apparently this was at a time when the grass was low in the area of Hebron area, maybe a famine, maybe a shortage of rain. For some reason, they needed to move the flock. So we find 10 of the brothers all going together now, and they're taking all the flock. So it must have been a huge undertaking. And they started out for Shechem. We find out that they stayed there in Shechem for some time, apparently, until the grass got low there and they needed to move on. And when Joseph is going to find them, they're actually about 14 miles north of Shechem. But he comes there, his father, going back to that story, his father says to Joseph, you need to go and check on your brothers. They've been gone for an extended period of time, which was an undertaking because it ended up that Joseph traveled 50, 60 or more miles to find the brothers. When he got to Shechem, he couldn't find them anywhere. So this is like a 5 or 6 day journey for him. He carrying food to supplement their food supply, carrying things that the brothers would want or need. And when he got there, they weren't there, so he ran into a man there. He said, have you seen my brothers with all the sheep? Oh, yeah, they moved up about 14 miles north. And so he makes that trip. One can only imagine what Joseph felt like when he saw the brothers from a distance. He finally found them. A lot of us can't identify with a 17-year-old lad. Maybe some of you men who went to the service at 17 and you had to go away from home and you were by yourself. You could probably identify a little bit more than what we all can. But to be a 17-year-old lad and given all this responsibility to go out on your own and to find this, and then to finally come upon the hillside and look at a distance and find your brothers and all the sheep. What joy, what anticipation, what satisfaction that the journey's now complete. I mean, I tried to realize or think what Joseph would have felt like. With all those feelings that he now had, let's look at page 85, which is going to include your verses from 18 to, I can't see the little print, 21? 22, okay. So let's look at that. It says, they saw him in a distance, and before he had reached them, they plotted to kill him. They said to one another, oh, look, there comes that dream expert. So now come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say that a vicious animal ate him. Becomes of his dreams. Now when Reuben, the elder son, heard this, he tried to save him. He said, let's not take his life. Reuben also said, don't shed blood. Just throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. And then it's like a comma, because it reports that Reuben was intending that when the other brothers are away, that he would come back and get Joseph out of the pit. Now, one of the, applying the text is in the back of your book, I think it's number 2, it says simply this: believers must guard against peers bent on hurting others. Now, we've all seen how easy it is for a mob to gather, or a picket line to gather, or somebody who's going to march, so to speak, for a cause. Immediately that crowd grows very fast. It's very easy to just side in, and there's very few people. In fact, when they interview, some of these that we've just seen lately, the marches and so forth, you ask them why they're there. Some of them don't even have any clue whatsoever why they're there. They're just joining in. And this is what Christians can do also when it comes to gossip, or for any vindictive attitude. So what this scripture and this person who wrote this text is trying to help us to realize is, be Christian enough, be God-like enough, be man, woman enough alike. When you hear this gossip, or when you hear some sort of conspiracy, be your own person. Analyze it. Figure out, should I have part and privy of this, or should I stand up and say, no, it's wrong? Because this is what happened to the brothers. They were just sitting around, kind of like idly sitting there. They looked up and they were talking about their lives. They're talking about their injustices, their unfairness. They were just kind of around a bonfire, probably, or around sitting around like it would be around a bonfire, and just these men talking back and forth. And as one person would say, one of them would say, well, this was not fair to me. Well, this wasn't fair to me. Well, this was an injustice to me. It just grew and grew and grew and grew, till in these couple verses we find out that this grew so strongly that their intent was, if they ever see Joseph, what? They were going to kill him. Can you imagine it growing to this fast? And yet that is what we have to guard against. Your book will say something like this: believers must guard against peers bent on hurting others. So we're going to find out exactly what had happened here. They looked up and they saw Joseph as he appeared. On page 87, the rest of this text here, scripture verses. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off Joseph's robe, the long-sleeved robe that he had on. Then they took him, threw him into the pit. The pit was empty, without water. They sat down and ate a meal. When they looked up, there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying aromatic gum, balsam, resin, going down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what do we gain if we kill our brother and kill up the blood? Come on, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, and lay not a hand on him, for he is our brother and our own flesh. And his brothers agreed. And when the Midianite traders passed by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit, sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph to Egypt. Wow. This is how rapidly this jealousy grew, and how this mob situation grew within the brothers, that they were going to, upon seeing Joseph. You've read or you've talked about what Joseph would have felt like when his coat was ripped off of him. He was thrown into a pit, and the brothers, while he's down in a pit, It says a dry pit, but it might have been a muddy dry pit. Down there, so deep that he couldn't get out. He begged for them to get them out, asked them, pleaded with them, why are you doing this? But they, you know what they're doing? They're sitting around that pit, circling it, and they're eating. They're laughing. They're partying. They have accomplished what this jealousy started in them. They are getting even, revengeful with Joseph. Well, one brother, Reuben, the oldest, spoke up, and he didn't want to kill Joseph. And so he spoke that up. But when they looked up, they saw this Midianite caravan. If you remember, we talked about Shechem. We said one of the reasons that Jacob settled there first was it was a main thoroughfare where caravans would just travel and go to Egypt and go back and get their wares and sell them. So now we have this group, and they decided, we will now ask them, do you want to buy a slave? Young boy, 17 years old, he's strong. Do you want to buy a slave? And so they bought him for 20 pieces of silver. Does anything ring a bell in your head when we're talking about a robe ripped off and being sold for silver? Well, here's one of those that a lot of people will say is a typology of what Jesus, the Messiah, is going to become. Or they can see references to Jesus in this. Now, Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver, Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. They ripped the kingly robe off of Jesus, and they were going to shred it to pieces. They cast lots for it. They were going to shred it to pieces. So there's a lot of similarities here as we're going to go through this life of Joseph that we're going to see. Well, the rest of the story that is in not in your book completely. Joseph was taken to Egypt as a slave. Joseph's coat was then covered with blood. They brothers killed a goat, dipped the coat in the blood, took the coat home to Jacob and said, we found this, and we assume that a vicious animal got him. It said Joseph wept. And the episodes, the emotions that's in some of these stories, the emotion that Joseph had while he was in a pit, the emotions of the brothers, now the emotions of Jacob when his beloved son is gone, is killed, is dead, is ripped from him. He mourned for so many days he wouldn't eat. He thought he could not live. He was thinking he'd have to end his life. He didn't want to live without his son Joseph. The emotions there. But can you only imagine the feeling that Joseph had? 17, taken to Egypt. And there's a verse in Psalm 105 that says, God sent a man before them, Joseph, sold as a slave. They bruised his feet with shackles, and his neck was put in irons. I don't know how he was taken, whether he was drugged, whether he had to walk, whether he was thrown on an animal. 17 years old, not knowing the language that the people are speaking, not knowing anything about Egypt, and when he gets there, put on a slave block and sold as a slave. The Bible records that it will continue that he was bought. He was bought by the executioner. Did you know that? The captain of the guard was the chief executioner for the land of Egypt. He bought Joseph, a lad of 17, didn't know their language, didn't dress like them, didn't know their religions and their worship at all. And there he is ripped from his family, and he is in Egypt. Joseph's life is going to continue in Egypt, and all the time that Joseph is there, he doesn't know why. He doesn't understand how God could possibly have left him endure all this. But God has a sovereign plan. And you and I know it because we can peek to the back of it. When Joseph says to his brothers after forgiving them, "You meant it to me to hurt me." But God had this overall sovereign plan that he was going to work out a way to let the Israelites grow in number, being protected in the land of Egypt. And he sent me ahead so that I could be instrumental in doing all this. It behooves us sometimes for the tragedies that we find ourselves in to know that you've trusted Jesus as your Savior. You've trusted him, that he is sovereign over our lives. We may not know why things are happening, how we get involved in things that seem evil, but God has a plan, and to trust him. And the story is going to continue in the next several weeks, and the life of Joseph in Egypt is just amazingly vivid of how God puts his hand on Joseph. He blesses him, and he uses him. He puts him in a position where he's head over the whole land. And who would ever think that a slave boy would end up to be second in command over Egypt? But God does that. And God has a way to literally pick up broken pieces, put them back together, and bring something good out of it. Remember the quote that I said, God can redeem even the worst of circumstances. He can redeem them. He can buy them back and make something good out of it. So it's going to be interesting as we study this life of Joseph now for the next 4 weeks, as we find out what is God going to do with Joseph in the land of Egypt. Thank you.